Hey guys, Matt Laidlaw here. So today I'm going to be switching it up and doing something a little bit different. Today we're going to be roasting Indian motorcycles. Growing up, I've been closely involved with the motorcycle industry, as many of you know, and just being involved with Harley-Davidson for as long as I have, it's hard not to kind of take note on different motorcycle companies. A lot of you guys know that I consider myself first a motorcycle enthusiast and second a Harley-Davidson salesperson. So I wanted to basically just kind of jump into some of the things that I've witnessed over the past decade or so in relation to Indian motorcycles and really Polaris as a whole. Before Polaris owned Indian, they had Victory motorcycles, and for years I've just kind of just joked around about just the ways that they just blatantly copy Harley-Davidson. And guys, I do this for fun. Really, I don't have any animosity towards other brands. For the most part, I support other brands of motorcycles, but I can't stand idly by or sit idly by anymore and just watch Polaris just blatantly copy Harley-Davidson. It's so cringeworthy how bad their entire product development and product offering to their customers is so much hinged on what Harley-Davidson does, and just how blatantly they just rip off Harley-Davidson's product ideas and direction and culture of their company. So this kind of is sparked. I've been kind of wanting to do this video for a while because every time Indian comes out with a new bike or does something different, it's just right on the heels of Harley-Davidson doing something similar. Now with all these spy photos and things like that have come out with this new Challenger motorcycle coming out that's ripping off the Road Glide, I figure this is a perfect time to really come out and just talk about how funny this is. It's so blatant. I mean, everybody over the internet is just saying, wow, it's the Road Glide. And it's just so funny how their entire business practice is just predicated on just copying Harley-Davidson. And I get it. You want to look what your competitors are doing, especially if your competitors are dominating you, which Harley-Davidson is absolutely dominating Indian. And there's no surprise there. Everybody knows that. And so I get it when you try to look at your competitor and try to grow and better yourself off your competitor. There's no shame in that, but you got to be a little bit more tactful about the way you go about it, especially in the internet age where everything is so transparent and information is shared so quickly. But this right here is a video that Indian just released on their new Power Plus 108 cubic inch engine that they're coming out with here pretty soon. And this is that new Challenger rip-off Road Glide fairing that they came out with. It is more of a Cyclops look, but I guess we're going to have more information on the 29th of this month. They're going to kind of reveal it. We kind of have the specs and everything on the new 108 cubic inch liquid cooled engine, and the horsepower. It puts up pretty good, dang good numbers, I will admit, but it is water cooled, which makes it a completely different animal, and higher numbers, higher horsepower figures especially are more achievable. Yeah, I want to kind of go over some examples and things that I've seen in about the last 10, 11, 12 years that I've seen Polaris, who is the mother company that owns Victory. Victory is now gone because Polaris bought Indian and scrapped Victory because I'm assuming they felt like Indian was a better marketing move with a better PR, and people would relate to that brand a little bit more, although there's nothing about the current Indian name and brand and company that is at all tied to the original Indian company, which I'm going to be going more into that in just a minute. But let me just kind of talk to you guys about the top things that I've seen in the past years that I just felt were just kind of like you got to have some balls to do these moves. I mean, this is just like complete blatant ripoff. But yeah, let me start off with number one here. So one of the funniest things that I see about Indian, and that's just kind of a total misrepresentation of their company as a whole, is just all this narrative and messaging about their longevity in the market since 1901. They say out in front since day one, America's first motorcycle company. This is Indian's website, by the way. But they always, they talk about 1901 because it looks good when you compare it to Harley-Davidson's 1903. Oh, we were here before you. We're the original motorcycle company. And you know what? Indian was the first original, motorcycle company in America. The only problem is Indian does not exist anymore. The original Indian company filed for bankruptcy in 1953, and the entire company was dissolved, and there's nothing left of the original Indian motorcycle company. And long story short, after 1953, when they filed for bankruptcy, there was different fights and things like that in the courts over ownership of who got to sell motorcycles underneath that brand and who could sell motorcycles to that brand. And that's all it was. There was no brick and mortars or assets or archives of motorcycles or lineage of models or family involved in the company or the headquarters headquarters was in the same place. There's none of that. Nothing from the original Indian company is still intact. And so all you have is just these investors and companies basically paying for that intellectual property and the rights to sell the badges. I mean, for a while there, Royal Enfields were being sold with the Indian badge on there. I mean, the Indian name has been passed around more than a Tijuana hooker. I mean, there's nothing original about Indian anymore. What we have now in today's marketplace is Polaris owns the rights to manufacture and sell motorcycles under the IP of Indian Motorcycle. There's no family involved. There's no assets. There's no original buildings or manufacturing plants or nothing of the sort. And really, this company started in 2011 when Polaris bought Indian. So they have a study our history on the website, and they're pretty transparent about this. So I got to give them props. But just their messaging of the whole 1901 and the original Americas is just very misleading, and obviously it's marketing propaganda, and it's just kind of fraudulent the way they market their motorcycles, and obviously they want to compete with Harley-Davidson, and to kind of contrast them against Harley. Well, Harley-Davidson has been continuously running since 1903. They have go to Juneau Avenue. There's awesome history there. A lot of their buildings have been in the same company forever. Heck, some of the Davidson family members that have blood ties to the original Davidson brothers that founded Harley-Davidson back in 1903 are still alive and involved in the company. Guys like Willie G. Davidson, these guys are like icons that, have history, that have bloodlines to the original founders, are still involved in the company. Like, that is super, super cool. You can actually go to the buildings in Milwaukee. It started in Milwaukee. The headquarters is still in Milwaukee. There's tons of history there. They have archives of a bunch of old motorcycles there. Harley-Davidson is completely the opposite of Indian. Everything they've started and grown over 115 years of being in the motorcycle business. They have those assets still for the most part, and they pull from their heritage of bikes when they create new models as well. So you can't even compare the two. To say that Indian started in 1901 and Harley was a couple years after, so we're the original. I mean, that's just I can't say it without laughing. It's so funny. But Indian does kind of lay it out here and what they've done. You can't fault them for that. But yeah, it's very misleading the way that they market and brand their motorcycles. Now, I know some troll is going to come in here in the comment section and be like, hey, Matt, well, what about the AMF days? Okay, well, let's talk about the AMF days. So in 1969, Harley-Davidson was on the verge of bankruptcy. They were in a really tough place. AMF stepped in, bailed them out, paid a bunch of money, got the financial control of Harley-Davidson Motor Company. The company was still in operation. A lot of the same people, a lot of the same facilities, a lot of the same stuff going on. Yeah, AMF tried some stupid things out like boats and snowmobiles and things like that, and the motorcycle quality went to pot. The motor company, Harley-Davidson Motor Company, was still in operation, largely in the same daily operations as they were prior to that. And then in the early 80s, during the buyout, when Willie G. Davidson and several of the executives came back and bought back the company from AMF, again, they regained financial interest and ownership of the company, but the company never stopped operation. And for the most part, everything really stayed intact, and it wasn't like, shifted physically or anything like that. So yeah, to compare the two is just kind of a joke. So let's jump into roast number 2. So right around 2010, 2011, Harley-Davidson was kind of launching this really big styling shift called Dark Custom. That's kind of what they called it and branded it. And it was this shift towards more of a youthful appeal, and was like blacking out these bikes. Things like the Street Bob, the Night Train, the Crossbones. They were using the Fat Bob. They were using this brand messaging of Dark Custom, where they were blacking out more bikes, kind of giving it that bobber look. And up until this point, cruisers were really synonymous with chrome. We think about blacking bikes out now, and it's like, well, you think that was unique to Harley-Davidson, Matt? You got another thing coming to you. Well, at the time it was. And Harley-Davidson, I remember, and some of you guys may have seen my Nightster video. The Nightster was like very groundbreaking, and it kind of marked a shift in Harley-Davidson's styling culture within the motor company in a direction that has now progressed all the way to where now we see the Road Glide Limited this year getting blacked out from the factory, and the Ultra Limited getting blacked out from the factory. I mean, this has been a decade in the making. And so it's just funny, right? Like, I want to say 3 or 4 years later, sure enough, our friends over at Victory and Indian, they start blacking out their bikes. I can't remember what they called it from Victory, but the Indians, they call them the Dark Horses, I believe. But they didn't offer anything of the sort during that time period. And, it wasn't until Harley-Davidson, they noticed Harley-Davidson really picking up steam with this blacked out look and it appealing to a younger demographic that they, kind of jumped on that bandwagon and just totally ripped it off. Again, I think a lot of people are probably saying like, oh, well, Matt, blacking out bikes isn't a ripoff. Anybody can black out a bike. But and you're right, that's true. But no one was doing it. Harley was the first one to do it. And like I said, it was more of a chrome. Chrome is the best. More chrome, the better. We were kind of transitioning from that baby boomer mentality of all chrome into now, this more grunged out, as you're seeing in the video here, more grunged out, inner urban misfit type of persona where these guys were, doing the bobber blacked out look. So Harley-Davidson made the first leap and Indian definitely copied. So roast number 3, and I probably could have started with this one because this is kind of the most general and obvious one, but basically every bike that's in Indian and Victory when they were still around in their lineup can basically be correlated or tagged onto a bike in Harley-Davidson's lineup that they directly copied. So, and I will say there is one exception to that, and that is the FTR, which I give Indian mad props and credit for the FTR. I think it was a cool bike that a lot of people wanted, that was groundbreaking, and that no one else really had a bike quite like it. So mad props there. I understand it's not selling very well, but that's besides the point. But everything else, like you've got here, like your Chieftain, this is a direct copy of the Street Glide. And if you guys haven't seen my Street Glide video, I definitely would recommend watching that. Basically, the Street Glide was the catalyst that revolutionized and started the entire bagger, quotes, movement out there. And so, a lot of these other guys now have all jumped on that bandwagon and made their version or their knockoff of the Street Glide, including other brands as well. But yeah, the Chieftain is definitely a knockoff here. These right here are either, I think they're model year 17 bikes. This is before they redesigned the fairing. This fairing wasn't close enough to the Street Glide fairing. It was still kind of that Indian-esque. So this, like last year, I believe it was, they redesigned the fairing again to make it even look closer to the Street Glide fairing, and I'll go into that in just a second. But the infotainment system too, just because as a side note, Harley launched their infotainment system in 2014. Then I believe a year or two later, Indian launched theirs. I think they call it like the Command Center or something like that. But I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna make a whole separate roast section for that. But it's just funny how they copied the infotainment system as well. Yeah, basically I can go down Indian's lineup, and I could do this with Victory's lineup as well, and just say, hey, that's the bike that they copied the Road King on. That's the bike they copied the Street Glide on. That's the bike they copied the Roadmaster. That's their ultra limited copy. They've got a bike called the Springfield, which is their Road King copy. Their Chieftain is the Street Glide copy, and then they've got a regular just Chief, and that's the Softail copy. So, and they've even got things like the Chief Classic, and so it's even down to little variations in the models. Indian has just copied Harley-Davidson. It's just like, guys, please. I mean, and they did make the FTR, which I give them props for, like I already said. I give them props to the FTR, but other than that, it's like, guys, make people like and respect Indian. You can't get respect if all you do, every single model you come out with is just a copy of Harley. Like, make Indian unique in its own company, So if you want to compete, make it something different than what Harley already offers, and in most cases does better. So come on, guys. That's really the brunt of my roast there. Is just the fenders on Indians are hideous too, by the way, and they changed that recently as well. But yeah, just every single model is just a copy of Harley. Come on, guys. Roast number 4 is pretty simple and to the point. So the fairings were redesigned last year. These are the Chieftains, the Street Glide knockoff, and they redesigned these fairings to look even closer to the Street Glide if they weren't already close enough. Indian decided to make them even closer, and they got the vents in there as well. So in 2014 model year, Harley-Davidson made the Rushmore project, put that vent right there in their Batwing fairing, and who decided to do the exact same thing? You guessed it. Indian Motorcycle rocking their new fairings with the vents in there, their Batwing fairings. And so if they weren't already close enough to the Street Glide, well, now their new redesigned fairing, recently knocked off fairing, now looks just like the Street Glide fairing. Roast number 5 has to do with their accessories. So Harley-Davidson is very well known for their genuine Harley-Davidson accessories. So Indian has decided to go to market with authentic accessories. And a lot of times people joke about Harley-Davidson, the bike is just a down payment for the accessories, and Indian wants a piece of that too. So in recent years, Harley-Davidson through their Screaming Eagle line has introduced a lot of stage kits and boosting performance, with the use of incorporating, these stage kits. And so Indian decided to do that too. So you got little measurements like how much more power and torque you get in their stage 2 with their cam and things like that, which for, I want to say right around the 2014 model years when Harley-Davidson really started pushing that a lot, and Indian followed suit. And another thing that's kind of funny too about Indian is they're so desperate to drive their parts and accessories that they hire guys like Arlen S., just these legendary Harley-Davidson accessorizers and Harley builders that just kind of organically over the years built a business around making accessories for Harley-Davidson. Well, now you got Indian coming in and paying them to basically do collaborations to make parts for Indian to make them cool. I don't know, but I think we all know you really can't buy cool all the time. And to be fair, Harley-Davidson does this too to a certain extent. It's not uncommon for companies to hire celebrities and high-profile figures to market and advertise your products for you. I just think it's funny that Indian, out of desperation, specifically targets guys that are very well known who have decades of experience and time manufacturing and making parts specifically for Harley-Davidson motorcycles. So this next bike is actually a Victory Octane, not an Indian, but they're both owned by Polaris, so I thought I'd include it. Plus at the time, I was so dumbfounded that they would actually try to pull a stunt like this. It was just so desperate and pathetic. But during this time, it was about the 2016 calendar year. About this time, the whole Dyna craze was getting super, super popular. So out of desperation, Victory really wanted something that's going to appeal to the Dyna guys, the Dyna bros. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with that culture and that movement, maybe check out my club style video or maybe my Lowrider S video or something like that. But basically the Dyna chassis and platform within the Harley-Davidson lineup just got really popular during this time, and it's still really, really popular right now. But it was the Lowrider S was launched early 2016 calendar year. And I want to say like a month or two later, all of a sudden the Victory Octane shows up. And, it's got this little quarter fairing on it, just like the Lowrider S did. And just a lot of the styling and like a lot of the marketing with like the burning out and doing wheelies and stuff was just like totally trying to like be like a Dyna bro. Like Victory was trying to make like a Dyna bro bike. It was just so pathetic. It was hilarious when it was happening. Shortly thereafter, I believe is when Victory threw in the towel and they scrapped the Victory line altogether. So I don't think very many Octanes got sold, but it was just so funny how they just tried to all of a sudden duplicate the whole Dyna scene and Dyna movement by making their like little Dyna off of, it's a Scout platform basically. It's an Indian Scout is what it was. During this time period, that's when they had an overlap of Victory and Indian being produced at the same time from about 2011 to like 2016, 2017, something like that. And so, yeah, they basically stole the Scout platform, tried to make it into a Dyna, and it was just a pretty pathetic attempt. Now to move on to my 7th and final roasting on Indian motorcycles. So some of you may have noticed if you were listening closely that as I was going through the different models that Indian has copied, I left out a key model that represents a large number of sales for Harley-Davidson. So Indian needed to act quickly. That's right, they're copying the Road Glide. So we've seen little sneak peeks and spy photos and things like that of this bike. It's set to be released next week, but basically you got your shark nose, kind of a Cyclops. I guess they didn't want to go all in and just be blatant and do 2 headlights up there, but it's called the Challenger, and they even copied the damn name. Like, can't you come up with a different name other than Challenger that's been used by Dodge for years? I mean, I get it. There's only so many names in the English language, but pick one that isn't already being used by a major vehicle manufacturer. I get it. It's not a motorcycle manufacturer, but Challenger. I mean, and are you somehow like insinuating that you're now going to be challenging Road Glides? I just don't get it. So I want to start off by thanking Dan over at Gears and Gadgets. Definitely check out his YouTube channel if you haven't seen his stuff. He puts out some pretty good commentary. And I also want to thank Greg Grzywacz, who actually, I'm assuming, was just traveling down the road on Highway 1 going up PCH along the Central California coast, and I'm assuming he just had his GoPro on and just happened upon a large group of these riders who are speculated to be press guys out on these bikes for probably when this bike is announced on Tuesday. You'll probably have all your media outlets, like all the major motorcycle publications, talking about the bike as well to kind of launch it in a big way. So I'm guessing he probably stumbled upon those guys riding the bikes for the first time, but he got some pretty good footage that is pretty clear, that gives us a good picture of this bike. And my gosh, it it couldn't be more of a direct copy of a Road Glide without actually probably infringing on like some patent and copyright stuff. I mean, this thing is totally Road Glide. I will say I gotta give credit where credit is due. In Indian, it appears as if they're going towards more of a performance-based, performance orientation on things like your front end. You got an inverted front end on this bike, and so that's pretty cool. I gotta give Indian kudos there, because I feel like we're right at the start of a performance bagger trend in the industry. Of course, the bike that's kind of the pioneer, the catalyst behind this performance bagger movement is the Harley-Davidson Road Glide. The majority of performance baggers out there are all built on Harley-Davidson Road Glides. Not all of them, but the majority of them out there. And so it just kind of seems to be the bike of choice among these builders that are building these performance baggers out there. And it's been interesting to see kind of the shift from the batwing fairing and the preference kind of shifting over to the shark nose fairing in recent years. Just last year was the first year we've had where we actually sold more Road Glides than we did Street Glides. They're both pretty close, but the Road Glide definitely did eclipse the Street Glide in sales last year. But it's kind of cool to see Indian recognize this trend at relatively early stages for a manufacturer, and to jump on it and to build a bike. It looks like they've got radio mounted brakes, inverted front end. They've got this new engine that they're coming out with that puts out 122 horsepower. Of course, it is liquid cooled, and that's another thing about these engines is the thing that's great about a Harley-Davidson engine is just the character and just the detail in the engine when you look at it. If you look at a water-cooled engine, there's really nothing aesthetically pleasing about it. And that being said, aesthetics aren't everything, but in a cruiser motorcycle, especially when you have that culture combined with it, aesthetics do count for something. So you lose an element of character when you move from an air-cooled engine over to a water-cooled engine. Of course, a lot of people don't care about that, and I get that. But I'm just saying there's always a give and a take with everything. I gotta say, one of the top things that I hate about the Indian baggers is just the fairing shape and the design. Like, these fairings just look so bulbous, and just like they start too far forward and stretch really far back, and the bars are just absolutely hideous. If Harley-Davidson tried to pull a stunt like that and put these bars on there that like pull way back from the front and just like shoot like straight back at you like horizontally, people would riot at the factory. Like, these things are just so ugly. You can't do custom bar. Like, I'm curious to see custom bars on an Indian, just because the bars are just so heinous, and just because they have to try to fit it around this big bulky fairing. It's just the product development and the design behind these fairings is just so poor. It's just like they slap something together that's gonna fit, and just the Harley-Davidson fairings are just a lot cleaner, and there's just more thought to them. The overall design, I can't hate on too much, I guess. It just like looks like a car hood almost. Like you got an engine in there, like in your fairing or something. So yeah, it's just too big, too bulky, and that's actually one of the reasons why I prefer the batwing fairing over even the Road Glide fairings. I like the smaller footprint of a smaller fairing. That being said, I may do a Road Glide next bike, because relatively speaking, especially when you compare it to this big old thing, like the Road Glide fairing is pretty small. So yeah, it's not a fan of the shape of the fairing. I'm gonna ride it and see how I like it. The other thing that people love to say is, wow, it's great to see Indian innovating. It's gonna push other companies to do better, and mostly they're referring to Harley-Davidson to do better. And it's just funny because everybody, when it comes down to plopping down that money, most people get the Harley. And I just feel like people just want to see Indian do good stuff, just so it will push Harley-Davidson further, so that when they go to buy a bike, they get a Harley that is a better product because they had to be pushed because of Indian, if that makes sense, if you follow me on that. So everyone's kind of rooting for the underdog. Everyone's excited for these new things, because then Harley's gonna have to step up their game. But quite frankly, I see this bike as them just kind of catching up to the Road Glide. Things like the extra power and things like that. Yeah, it's nice on the stat sheet, which is in the internet world that we live in. There's a lot of stat warriors out there, but we have to see how that power is delivered, where it's delivered, how easily accessible that power is. I mean, it produces that horsepower at really high RPM, but that's to be expected. And if you compare that to like Harley-Davidson's Stage 4 kit, the Stage 4 kit puts out a little bit more power than this engine will, but that's also a 114, so more displacement. So yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see how exactly this power delivery is and how the fueling is and everything else. There's just a lot of things that don't show up on the stat sheet that people don't realize until you actually ride the bike. So that concludes my roasting session for today, guys. I know there's probably gonna be a lot of people that are like, oh wow, Matt, you're just a hater, because you're a Harley salesman. And yeah, I'm a Harley salesman. I'm biased. I'm a Harley fanboy. I totally admit that. So, save yourself the comment in the comment section. But, it's just, I feel like the popular thing to do in like the last like 5-6 years on the internet is just to hate on Harley-Davidsons. It's just a popular thing to do right now. Hate on Harley-Davidsons. And I've taken jabs at Harley-Davidson too as well. I'm not all roses when I talk about Harley-Davidsons. I do feel like they have the best product for the cruiser class motorcycle out there, but at the same time they're not perfect, and I feel like there's things that they've done in recent years to kind of go in a new direction that the current market and current new customers looking for. And so I feel like Harley-Davidson is taking some steps to appeal to the new market that we're in now. I know the other comment I might get is people might say, yeah, you're just hating on Indian because you're worried that they're gonna bite into the Harley-Davidson sales and you're worried about the competition. Guys, I can probably, in the last 13 years of selling motorcycles, Harley-Davidsons full time, I can probably count on one hand. Actually, there's two. There's been two people in 13 years of selling Harley-Davidsons that have come into the dealership and said, hey, I'm also cross-shopping you guys against Indian. I really want to do my research and find out which has the better value, which one I can get the best bang for the buck. It just never happens. People don't come in to a Harley dealer to kind of cross-shop against Indian. I'm almost kind of amused when I hear it, just because it's like, wow, I have an opportunity to kind of battle against Indian a little bit and kind of give people the features and benefits of a Harley-Davidson versus an Indian. I get to kind of test my skills a little bit. 99.999% of the competition that I see at a Harley-Davidson dealership is the other Harley-Davidson dealership down the road, not Indian. In fact, in California, like, you just hardly ever even see Indians on the road. Seeing an Indian in the wild is like seeing a cute little cuddly panda bear in the wild. They're kind of these mythical creatures that exist, but you never really ever see them. But when you do see one, everyone kind of crowds around and like, ooh and ah, and they ask questions, and then the person who's riding the bike has to go on for the next 30 minutes and explain to everybody why they bought the Indian and not the Harley-Davidson. Whereas if you roll up somewhere on a Harley, you never have to explain to anybody why you bought the Harley-Davidson over the Indian. Really, they've never been a competitor, at least in my market, with Harley-Davidson. I never have to ever compete or worry about them biting sales from our dealership specifically. Now, in other parts of the country, maybe they're more popular, but in California, we enjoy the real thing out here. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.